Tuvalu is a small island nation which is projected to disappear forever, so they're trying to build a digital replica of the country. Hi, in this video we'll be able to listen to some of the guests which we invite to our weekly Mr. Metaverse discussion. So the topic is the preservation of Tuvalu. So if you know, if maybe you don't know, Tuvalu is a small island nation which is projected to disappear forever because of the rising ocean level, and that it will disappear by the end of this decade. Approximately, but not decade, sorry, century, by the end of the century. So in next 80 years. And they are now making the efforts to become first digital nation, which is really interesting case and really interesting case study. I'm curious to hear any of the speakers familiar with this topic and would like to share more on this topic, or should I share more information before we proceed? So if many of the speakers would like to share a bit more.
I don't know anything about it, but maybe somebody who's like closer to Estonia can like say something about it, because like they've been doing it for decades, and basically it's just like Estonia on steroids, as much as I understand from what you've just said.
I mean, they are going completely digital, doing the digital nation. They're not just trying to make them digital, but they are going just digitalizing the society, that you can do anything digital. They're actually going digital. So their projection, there will be no Tuvalu at all by the end of the century. So the country will disappear, the physical representation of the country. So they're trying to build a digital replica of the country in kind of metaverse, in the metaverse. So or in the future, whatever it will be, how it will be called. So then they will have a digital parliament, they will have a digital, basically the recreation of the island they are based on, the whole home, and that allows to preserve the culture and the history and the nation. So that will be the first, if the nation, the physical nation will disappear, it will be the first only digital nation, which was created at the moment as it was still physically present. So it's an interesting case study, and just give a bit more into that. So what's Tuvalu is? Tuvalu is an island nation with population of only 12,000 people. This is this metaverse project for them. It's been around for more than a year already. It's since 2021. I think even maybe a bit more. I think it's since 2021. So it's kind of almost 2 years, if I remember correctly. And they call it as one of the extent. It's not just a project of selling the land or the real estate or whatever. It's an actual survival project, existential survival of the nation, preservation of the nation, because basically up to 40% of districts of the capital are underwater already during the high tide. Almost half of the capital is already going underwater during the high tide, and then they're projected to go underwater completely by the end of the century. So that's why they proclaim on the conference at UN in Egypt. It was 2022, right? That they will build a digital replica of at least one of the islands which make up the country. And then, as I understand, if they will be successful, then they will build more of that. And it's an interesting project. I'm curious about what's your take on the preservation of the nations, which is under the risk of disappearing forever. And I think Timothy already raised a couple points on that. So let's start with Timothy. Timothy, what's your take on the preservation of the nations like Tuvalu, like a small micronations?
I think preservation is important because we ultimately, we learn from each other, right? If you only have one culture, one way of thinking, you're not going to advance in society. You need other cultures, you need other people to have conflicting opinions to be able to create new ideas, new experiences, new derivatives. And, the world is constantly changing. And right now, history is continually to repeat itself because the world is constantly changing. But if we can create a constant of history, then now we can actually know more about our mistakes that we've been making, instead of just letting it continue repeat itself in this vicious cycle of violence and scarcity. We can actually figure out how to create a place of abundance and wealth for everyone. So I am a big fan of what this project is doing with the metaverse, and I think this is the biggest potential for the metaverse, is just being able to create communities, be able to preserve culture, being able to communicate with anyone from around the world. Right now you can say that we're communicating with everyone around the world, but how many people of the world really have internet? How many people of the world can read and write language? Some languages you can't even write. You can only speak, right? So there's a lot of people around the world that can't even write. So being able to preserve cultures from all over the world to where we can actually learn from each other is very important. And I think that is one of the best use case scenarios for the metaverse, is just being able to create these communities, create these experiences where we're engaging with other cultures and other people that we might not have otherwise.
Dennis, what's your take on that?
So this is near and dear to my heart because my mom is from the Philippines, and I can see the sea level rise, washing away beaches, etc. But like, at least like the Philippines, they actually still have some elevation left, so the country will not disappear, but like a lot of the beaches will disappear, and that is like really really bad for for people, because like that's still a lot of the country, that's going to disappear, and a lot of countries have that problem, but just like the whole country disappearing and your whole culture, being annihilated, basically, it could be like one typhoon and that's it, that's just like the nail in the coffin. So maybe it's not like 100 years, maybe it's 50 years, because like one typhoon just like goes over you at high tide, and then you're done, like there's nothing left. So yeah, feel that, and yeah, what kind of other technologies are there to preserve your culture? You can go into diaspora, and then everybody would be around the world, and like we have a lot of diasporas of like different cultures, and Tuvalu is not a big country, so you will not have like 100,000 Tuvalu residents like going to New York and just like being there. So a digital place, is a much more intelligent way to reconnect and stay connected with all your people.
Thanks, Frank. And yeah, you are the right point that it's the thing for everyone. That's why I said it's a great example. They all can make a great example for all the nations, and make a case study. It's a great case study, and if they will go successful with that and it will work good, and maybe the diasporas of all the countries across of all the nations, I would say, which doesn't have a country, doesn't have a place to meet, then they can have their digital place where they can become like a nation, I would say. So they don't have a physical nation, but a digital one. If you like what you're listening right now, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. It takes a second for you to do it. It costs nothing, and it means a world to us. It shows us that we are moving in the right direction and we produce the right content. So thank you. Enjoy.
Yeah, and earlier I mentioned how cultures are constantly stealing from each other to make themselves better. We have a very prominent use case scenario of this happening in the US. It's called Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore used to be called the Six Grandfathers. It was very sacred to natives, but because they wanted to show the natives that they were no longer welcomed on their land, they painted all their colonizers on their monument. So the Mount Rushmore is nothing but colonization being exploited and exploiting natives of their original land. So like that is a perfect example of a culture stealing from another culture to promote themselves. So being able to go back in time and showing the original story of the Six Grandfathers and making it known that this is actually the Six Grandfathers, not Mount Rushmore, is very important. So we can actually understand like this is not okay. Like we need to be more inclusive, more acceptable to everybody, and not just trying to dominate one over the other.
We have another U.S. citizen in discussion. So, Alexander, what's your take on that? What do you agree, and maybe you can expand on that?
I think Mount Rushmore is a great analogy. I was also going to mention the Maldives example we had in our discussion last month, where they're also trying to preserve the Maldives digitally just because of, again, rising sea levels. And I guess on one hand, it is a solution, but there is obviously a much larger problem at hand that we need to take a look at and, find a better solution to. But in terms of preserving culture, ways of life, and all of that, I think it's a great use case, not only for, nations threatened by rising sea levels or, extinction, anything like that, but for many countries just in general, for tourism, other, means of sharing, language, ways of life, and all of that. So it's cool on one hand that, we're able to do this, able to preserve their way of life and everything they do, but we also have to look at the reason why we have to do it and find a solution to that as well.
All right, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, Dimitri and David, and we will call it.
Yeah, so I think it's really, it's mainly the constraint here is the technical implementation of the preservation. So you mentioned, let's say Mount Rushmore, or like this whole nation being, whatever, like historical events. And I know, as far as I'm concerned, the kind of the most cost efficient way would be like industrial 3D scanning, and I guess that would be implemented through, let's say, flying over this beach with a like very high tech 3D scanner, which would be scanning all of the surface area of the beach with all of the trees, all the small minor details. And I don't know, like as far as I'm concerned, I don't really know the precise cost for that. I know that like a cost on a smaller scale in our case would be like statues or paintings or like that kind of objects. But I know that it's already possible because such industrial scanning already takes place within like factories or buildings. So, and there are actually, I know that a project which actually digitalized like a whole park. I'm from Latvia, and my friend told me about this case where they actually had to digitalize or like 3D scan the whole park. Like I don't know how many square meters there was, but like it was like quite a big park here in Riga, and they actually did it. And I know, given the fact that it's possible, maybe it's not that cost efficient yet, but with the development of the 3D scanning technology, I think that will be even more and more possible to scan bigger areas and in a more kind of efficient way, so that such nations like the one I mentioned earlier, as Mount Rushmore, would be totally preserved and stored, let's say, in some kind of metaverse on the virtual reality.
To that, like the costs depend on like what kind of drone you use. So like one of the cheapest drones would be around like 5,000 euros, and you need to have LiDAR because then you can actually tell the distance apart, and then you can also scan leaves on the trees, etc. Like, but as with anything, like try to catch a moving object from different angles. Now you will not catch like a proper tree or proper palm tree or whatever, but you can still simulate that in post-production. But like for scanning, you just need time, and like the software is like basically getting there, that it's like basically for free at some point, but you need a drone and some time to just basically scan everything from different directions and different vantage points multiple times, so you can be really sure that there is nothing left, because like you really don't want to walk on the beach and then suddenly the beach stops for 1 meter and then you just fall into a digital hole like with your avatar. You don't want that.
I'm curious to hear your take on that, David.
Sure, it's really interesting. Yeah, I know I've seen a video from NVIDIA looking at like being able to basically take drone footage and use AI to kind of like create a whole digital space where I think it's an exciting opportunity. I think ultimately, like we've seen with all these articles talking about these quiet metaverses or places where there's nobody actually walking around, right? I think that becomes the question, what really calls this country, like their citizens, to partake in the digital version of their country, right? And what's the incentive, so I think it's good on paper, it's a cool concept, but ultimately it comes down to adoption, and it comes down to making it worth it. Like, yeah, it's cool for preservation's sake, and I think that alone could make it worth it for sure. But when you talk about like actual governance and actual like expecting everybody to just operate in the digital world the same way they were operating in the real world, like I think that's a bit of an overreach, but it'll be interesting to see how it comes to fruition. And I do think, to Dimitri's point, the meta or the blockchain and being able to create non-fungible tokens connected to different kind of assets in there would be huge and necessary. Otherwise, how does anyone actually have true ownership of different pieces of that? So yeah, I'm interested in how that comes together, but I have some doubts on whether it would practically work the way that they're envisioning it. But yeah, it's interesting.
Thank you to the watching to the end. If you like more exclusive content, you like the memes, or you'd like to learn through the text, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Links in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and probably you might like this video.